Hello, my name's Dr. Ellie Atkins. I'm a clinical psychologist working at St George's Hospital in London. I've put together a training session about managing anxiety. I'm talking specifically around coronavirus, as obviously that's pretty present in everyone's mind at the moment, but the slides that I've got here will be just as relevant to any kind of anxiety and might be helpful to you, whatever you're coping with at the moment. So before I start, just a little bit about me. As I said, I work at St George's Hospital in London. And so my job there is to support children, young people and families around difficulties to do with physical health conditions and the impact that that has on their mental health. I'm looking a lot at well-being and distress. Obviously that's very big as an issue at the moment, so that's why I put together this presentation. It's really important to me that I say that this situation is unprecedented. Nobody's ever faced anything like this before in living memory. And I want you to know that you're not alone in what we're going through. But also, I think it's really important that I don't presume to know exactly what you are feeling. I don't know who will watch this show. And so I think it's really important that you can both be not alone and be somebody walk together with you without knowing exactly what the situation is for you. And I hope that there'll be helpful things in here for you, whatever you are coping with at the moment. You might have noticed I talk quite fast. I've always done that. The beauty of this being on a virtual platform is you can just pause it if you haven't caught what I said and rewind it. We'll see how it goes. And please, you can always come back to me with questions afterwards, obviously virtually, so we can find a way to interact if there's more things you want to know. So I'm going to start with key messages. At a time when we're really stressed out, our brains are quite busy processing everything that's coming in. And for that reason, if you only pay attention to one bit of this presentation, this is what I want you to pay attention to. My first key message is it's okay not to be okay. Like I said, this is an unprecedented situation and your body is designed to respond to that kind of situation. So feeling worried and stressed is very normal. And my second message is we can get through this. The stress and anxiety that you might be experiencing, there are things we can do about that will help, strategies you can put in place, whatever your situation, that will help. And it's really important that you know that we are in a really difficult time, but we are going to get through this. It won't last forever, and there will be a time on the other side when we can look back and start to process what we've been through. So this is what I'm going to cover in the course of my presentation. I'm going to talk about how we understand anxiety generally, and then why specifically this situation is having such an impact on us. And then I'm going to talk about what we can do about anxiety. I'm going to talk about all of us, and then I'm going to talk about what parents might do that might help children. Strategy is my key aim here, to give you some things that you can do, whatever the situation is that you're facing. So I'd like to start by explaining a little bit about how we understand anxiety. A good way to think about it is to divide our brain into three sections, and you can see this on the slide. So the first bit we call the reptilian brain, and if you wanted a really simple model to understand the brain, imagine we've got a golf club. So you've got the thick top bit of the golf club, and then the stick, the handle of the golf club is the little bit of spinal cord you can see there, and that goes all the way down our spine. So we've got this golf club bit of our brain, and that we often call our reptilian brain. Now, if you think about reptiles, things like a snake, for example, they have very simple, limited resources to cope with the world. And if you were walking through a field one day and there was a snake on the ground, the snake has got a couple of choices. This big hulking human is coming towards them. The snake's got some choices about what it does. Its first choice is it could rear up and bite the human on the leg. That would be fighting. Its second choice is to slither away very fast. That would be flight, it means to run away. Or its third choice would be to lie very still in the grass and hope that that big hulking human didn't notice it. So, and because of the way that we have evolved, we still have this very primitive system embedded in the back of our brain. And that, as I'm going to talk about in a minute, that's incredibly helpful. We want to have that kind of system. And then as evolution went along, we developed, the brain developed, and so then we get to the middle bit, the purple bit on your slide, and we often call this the mammalian brain, the kind of brain that mammals have. And when you think about what's different about a mammal compared to a reptile, one of the key differences, if you can kind of pull your mind back to biology that you might have done a very long time ago at school, the key difference with a mammal is that they give birth to live young as opposed to laying eggs. Now, that's really important because if you're a creature giving birth to live young and then you wander off to get some food because you're hungry, there are two key things that your brain has to do if you're going to ensure survival. And the first thing is you have to even remember that you've had a baby. If you're a snake and you lay eggs, it doesn't really matter if you forget that you've laid them because they're still safe in their egg case. But if you're a mammal and you leave your baby to get food and you don't remember about it, that baby's going to die. And the second thing is, so remembering that you've got a baby, you then need to care enough about it to want to take some food back to it and to put your child before yourself. And that's what essentially the mammal bit of the brain does. Now, if you want a very simple way to think about this, imagine that we get a sock, one of those thick, lovely, chunky walking socks, and we put it over the top of our golf club. And that's the mammal brain. So that's the place that we store a lot of our memories, and it's the place that the development of emotion. Okay, so then evolution has progressed and we get on to the development of the human brain. And when we're thinking about the human brain, we think about all the things that humans can do that other mammals can't do, or most other mammals can't do. We can do things around planning, we can do organising, we can think about consequences, like if I do this, then this is going to happen. And a lot of those happen in this front bit of our brain, the frontal cortex. It's really kind of high level thinking. Remember, language is also in this part of our brain, and that helps us to use the tools to communicate about the planning and organising and thinking that we're doing. So the thing about this is it's all very well to have this really clever human brain that we have, but when we're anxious, our brain essentially shuts down, and particularly the human brain bit shuts down, and we're left with the other bits of our brain. Quite often in the middle bit, that's the bit that does emotion, so we might be stuck in emotion, we might be stuck remembering difficult things, and we might be stuck right in the primitive, bit of our brain, the fight or flight part. Now, think about this. It makes quite a lot of sense, doesn't it, that we would need to do that sometimes. So imagine when humans first evolved, they might have faced dangers like a tiger, say. So they're out there walking, hunting and gathering food, and there's a tiger. Now, they've got this, they're newly evolved humans, they've got this really clever brain, and they could go, look at this tiger, isn't it an interesting shade of orange? Which would be their human brain thinking about things using language. It might think, oh, so should I do this or this? If I run into these trees, then this might happen. And if I run over to that rock, this might happen. Because if they spend time doing that, using their human brain and thinking things through, like their human brain does, that tiger's going to have eaten them. Therefore, having a human brain doesn't help you stay alive. Now, if you think about this in the modern context, if you were standing in the middle of a busy road and a bus was coming towards you, your brain could go, well, if I go to the left, then I'm likely to, land on that hard thing over there. And if I go to the right, I might fall on that lamppost, because by the time you've thought that through, the bus will have hit you. So we need to have an emergency system, a fight or flight mode that doesn't think, it just does. And it kicks in, it gets our body into action to move before we think about this. And you see this happen sometimes, because have you ever noticed how if you touch something very hot like the hob when you're cooking, that your hand pulls away before you've even registered that it has hurt, and then afterwards it hurts. That's our bodies reacting before we've even processed what's going on. So that's incredibly helpful sometimes, but sometimes it's not. We sometimes call this the tricky brain. It's evolved to keep us alive, but it sometimes means that we can't do the thinking at times when we really need to be. Now, I don't know about you, but in the last week or so, I have found it more difficult to think sometimes. I've definitely found it more difficult to concentrate. I found it difficult to get things finished. It's taken me all week to finish these slides. When I started them, I think I started them at the weekend. And that's because my brain, in this situation that we're in with COVID-19, is not firing on all cylinders. My human brain is not working quite as well as I would like it to be, because I'm anxious, because this is an anxiety-provoking situation. And that hasn't always been helpful, because I still need to do my job. but my brain is doing that for me. So that kind of leads us on to why we're anxious. So what I'm saying is it's evolutionarily adaptive to focus on the problems, to focus on the risks. And the humans who do that survive to pass on their genes. So it's the way that we're designed. And we actually know that we encode memories much better for problems than we do for good things. And again, if you're thinking about survival, if you're gathering berries, you need to remember those berries are dangerous and kill people much more than you need to remember these ones taste lovely, because it's the berries that kill people that are much more important. So we tend to focus on all the difficult things much more because it's a survival mechanism. And if you think about, you know, in public buildings, if there's a fire, they usually have their doors on special magnets. And when the fire alarm goes off, the doors automatically close. And that's kind of what happens in our brain. Just going to go back to this slide. So we've got all these clever bits of our brain. We've got the golf club, we've got the sock on the top, and then the human brain is like a bike helmet over the top. But imagine the doors automatically shutting and it being much harder to access the higher bits of our brain when we're in fight or flight, when we're feeling very anxious. So I'd like to talk about another analogy that really helps us to understand anxiety. In my house, I have a brilliantly wired-in smoke alarm system. And what happens is, if I cook toast and it burns a little bit because I've got the setting too high on my toaster, if I cook sausages under the grill in my oven, then, and I do it with the kitchen door open, then all the smoke alarms in my house start to go off. And this is a little bit like what happens in anxiety. In anxiety, we have this inbuilt mechanism that warns us. So in my house, I have an inbuilt mechanism that warns me if there's a fire. But unfortunately, when I burn toast or I am cooking my sausages, there isn't actually a fire. My alarm thinks there's a danger, but there isn't. Now, normally, when the danger has passed, the smoke clears, the anxiety goes down, or the analogy would be that we reset the button on the alarm. Now, the problem with coronavirus, well, I think there are two problems here. One is we can't see the danger. You can't see the virus, so you don't know when there's a threat and when there's not. It's easy with a tiger. You can see it. Your brain kicks in. You do whatever you need to do, and then you know where it is. You can manage that. Coronavirus puts us on high alert because we can't see it. We don't know what's going on. And the other problem with this is it's all consuming all around us. All our media outlets are talking about it all the time. Every single conversation you're having with anybody is talking about it all the time. And therefore, we're in a really tricky situation because it's like our alarm is going off and off and off and off. And I know personally, if my alarm was going off in my house all the time, it would drive me bonkers because it would stop me being able to think or to do anything else. I'd be so focused on the alarm, I wouldn't be able to do anything else. And our brains are like that at the moment. Our brains are in such high alert and we can't reset them because there's never the opportunity to, because this is going on. And every day with the press conference, it's very useful to have more information, but it does mean that we're always being bombarded by more information. So, take a breath. Is it okay to be anxious? Well, as you might remember from my key messages, it's absolutely normal to feel anxious at this time. What I've just been telling you is our brains are designed to react like this, and your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. And that will be the same for a lot of people that you know. And you know that pretty much everyone is feeling anxious because you just have to look at them, and you know that all our conversations are around this. And then there's not just anxiety about the virus, there's anxiety about the response to it, about food shortages, about childcare issues. And so there's lots and lots of things happening that are bubbling up. What also happens very commonly in anxiety, excuse me, and I see this quite a lot in my work, is that we get anxious and then we get anxious about being anxious. So we're stuck in a vicious cycle. Something happens, like we hear that the supermarkets have run out of pasta. So we start to feel anxious, and then we think, oh, I shouldn't be feeling like this, or it's not as bad for me as it is for somebody else. And then we feel bad about how we're feeling, and we get ourselves stuck in a really vicious cycle. And that's a really tricky place to be because we're kind of beating ourselves up for the very way that we're designed to work. And this is another thing that happens in our brain in anxiety, is normally there's all these different things going on in our head. at the moment, coronavirus is the huge thing. And one of the reasons is when we're anxious, another survival mechanism is what we call hypervigilance. That means paying a lot of attention. If there is a tiger around, you need to pay attention to exactly where that tiger is. And we know that humans are very well adapted to notice movement in the landscape. It's one of the things we're very good at. Something moves quite far away, it catches your eye. That's because we're designed to pay attention to that stuff. That's because it helps keep us alive. If there's a tiger moving up on the hill, we want to be out of the way before the tiger comes down to us. And now we're talking about coronavirus, we're paying lots of attention to it. And I wonder if you notice that people are talking about it, like I said, thinking about it a lot, Googling, and we just can't stop. I notice that I'm thinking about it in my sleep and I'm waking up in the night and thinking about it. That's our brain being hypervigilant to the threat because it's a way of our brain thinking it can keep us alive. And then once we start to get this brain stuff happening, there's some things that happen in our body. So when the fight or flight bit kicks in, that the red bit of our brain, the golf club, when that kicks in, that does some really clever things, some really helpful things. It sends a massive shot of adrenaline into our body. And that's really useful because we need that adrenaline if we're going to fight or flight or freeze. And the adrenaline does a lot of things. One of the things it does is it makes our heart beat faster because we want to pump blood around our body faster. If we're going to fight a tiger or we're going to run very fast, we need a lot of blood going to our arms and our legs because those are the bits that are going to have to work really hard. And in order to help with that, we breathe faster because if we're going to be doing all this exercise, we need a lot more oxygen going in. So we get more oxygen in, our heart pumps it around faster. Then what we might notice is that we start to feel a bit tingly in our arms and our legs because there's loads of blood, really good oxygenated blood rushing to all those parts of the body. That's great if we're using them to run. If we're just sitting here and this is happening, then that's a bit like having a sugar rush. There's loads of kind of body ready and we're not burning any of that off. We might notice some other things like the body is so incredibly clever in the way that this works, but the body is designed itself to think, well, I don't really need blood around my gut and in my stomach at the moment because that's not going to keep me alive when this tiger's coming. So I'm going to take the blood away from my tummy, away from my digestive system and put it to the bits that really need it. So we might feel sick or we might have butterflies in our tummy and that's the blood moving away from there and to the bits of our body that our body thinks we need it for. And so we get these physical symptoms, which are very, very normal. We might get some of the others you'll see there on the slide. In this specific situation, that's really tricky because you might feel really breathless if you're anxious, but we also know that breathlessness is one of the things they've been talking about around coronavirus. And so when we get physical symptoms, we can then get back in another cycle, like I was talking about on the previous slide, where we think there must be a problem because look, I'm breathing really fast, or my heart is beating really fast, or my mouth is dry, or I feel dizzy. Or I really need to wee all the time, or any of those things. And we might interpret that as a threat, and then therefore we're in double threat mode, aren't we? Because we're feeling threat about the initial threat, like the virus, and then we're feeling threatened because our body is doing something. And this is sometimes what results in a panic attack because we just, the level of anxiety just ups and ups and ups. That's us breathing very fast, our heart beating very fast, our body is responding, but then that feels very frightening. And so we think that maybe there's something wrong, maybe we're dying and or we're very ill, and that makes us feel even more panicky. And we can get very, very distressed and wound up by that. But even if you're not getting to that level, you might notice some of these things are happening. I've noticed that I'm drinking more than I would in my normal everyday life. I'm getting much more thirsty. I think my body is just working a lot harder at the moment than it might be at another time. Okay, so one more little bit of information to give you about this. Oh, just one other thing to say on this slide. This is from psychologytools.com. They have some brilliant resources on there and I'd really recommend you have a look. There's a link to it at the end of this presentation as well. So I'd like to talk a little bit about this model now. I want you to imagine that inside you there are these three systems going on. Imagine it like 3 balloons. So if you had 3 balloons, sometimes one of them's going to be bigger and sometimes one of them's going to be shorter, like blowing air into a balloon or deflating the balloon. And at different times, depending on what we're doing, our systems might be at different sizes. So for example, if it's a very lovely summer afternoon and you're sitting in a deck chair in your garden reading a book and sipping a long cool drink, it's likely that your green system, your soothing system, is going to be bigger. Your drive system, which is all about motivation, you might not be motivated to do that much, so that balloon's going to be smaller, and your threat system is probably going to be quite small as well. If, however, you're sitting in your garden in your deck chair in a nice cool drink and you don't get on with your neighbour and they start to play very loud music, your threat system might get bigger again. And if you want to know more about this system, there's a brilliant video on YouTube that I've linked there, but you can just search for it. It's called Compassion for Voices, and it explains something about how these systems might go up and down as we go through life. So, as I'm sure you've worked out, in the current situation, our red balloon is huge. This is like the other analogy that I used of the smoke alarm going off and going off and going off all the time. We feel under massive threat, and that makes it very difficult. And you can see that in the supermarket response. People feel under threat, and therefore their drive, which has got a bit bigger, is I must stock up because I'm really worried I won't be able to eat, I won't be able to get food, I might not be able to feed my family. Those are scary thoughts, and if you're having those, that's because this threat bubble has got really huge. What happens at times like this is because our threat system is so big, our green balloon, our soothing system, has got much smaller, and it's the one that we spend the least time attending to, when actually it's the one that in times of stress we need the most, because that's what's going to help us. So thinking about that soothing system and how we could do with that being a bit better, I want to talk about what we can do. Now, living in this situation, as I said at the beginning, is absolutely unprecedented. None of us have lived through anything like this before. I think it feels quite out of our control quite a lot, because what happens with this virus, how it spreads, how it progresses, how it affects our health systems, are to some degree out of our control. There obviously are things we can do. The policies put in place, like social isolation, social distancing, things like that, washing our hands, can make a massive difference. So those are already things we can do practically about the virus. But I'm going to talk more about the kinds of things that we can do that look after our mental health and the mental health of others. So I think it's possible to look at this situation in 2 ways. It's possible to say, well, this is out of my control. I can't do anything about that. Things are being, things are happening so fast. I can't cope with it. None of the decisions are mine. The impact on me will be quite negative. I also think there's another way to look at it. I think, which isn't the opposite. It's really important that it's not just, this is fine and I can do anything I want to do. That's not what I'm saying. What I think we can say, though, is this is a very difficult situation, but I can manage this. I can look after myself. I am limited, but it doesn't mean there's nothing I can do. I can still be positive despite this situation, and we will get through this. And I did have here a brilliant cartoon from the Awkward Yeti, who's referred to in my reference list at the end, with the body and the brain talking, and I would really urge you to look at it because it's very amusing, and I think has captured this kind of idea very well. It's quite often, this isn't the only situation where it feels like there's nothing we can do. For example, if we're feeling quite low, often we feel like there's nothing we can do, and we sit down and we just think, oh, life is really difficult. And actually there's lots of evidence that getting enough sleep, going for a walk, the impact of sunlight, fresh air and exercise are huge. And if you think about the slide I showed you earlier, this one of the things we know is that exercise makes a big difference to dispersing the adrenaline in our body. But quite often when we're feeling bad, all we do is sit on the sofa and feel bad. And so it's quite easy to get stuck in this way of thinking that I can't control this and nothing I can do will help. So I'm going to give you some situations, some practical tips, I think, that you can do whatever your situation, and you can pass on to other people whatever their situation. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that some people's situation will be really difficult. And I think I want you to take from this what's most helpful for you and for the people that you're supporting. So I think this is the place we start from. The absolute first thing we do is acknowledge and name the anxiety. And I'm going to talk more about that in a little bit and why I'm saying that that's important and what that means. I really like there's a kind of saying about accepting the things you cannot change and changing the things you can and having the wisdom to know the difference. I think if there's ever a situation where that's appropriate, it's here. There are things that you can take control of. And if you can, then do that. I think, for example, I really like to get 10,000 steps a day. I'm currently not on self-isolation, but obviously my activities are limited. And I think that I'll be doing a lot of walking up and down the stairs in my house to try and get some of my steps in. It's not perfect. I would like to be doing something else. But if that's the only way that I can do some exercise because I really value that, then that's the way that I will do it. And then the other thing that we know is really helpful is something we call meta thinking. That means thinking about what's going on, thinking about where you are in your head, what's working or what isn't. If you try something and it's not working, my first instinct would be to say persevere, because things don't always work first time. But if something isn't working, if you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to do something and that isn't work, think about that and think about what you could do. And I think keeping perspective is really, really important. You know, this is a really scary time for us, but most of us will be well or will get ill and come out the other side of it. And the biggest disruption will be the disruption to everyday life. For some people that is not the case and things will be much more difficult for them. But keeping perspective is really, really important. Because of the hype around this, it's difficult to stick to right now, nothing terrible is happening to me. And for a lot of people that will be true. So do try and keep perspective when you can. And I acknowledge that for some people that will be hard. So I said I would talk about why I'm saying, like I said in this slide, acknowledge and name the anxiety. Okay, and this is what I'm talking about now. Some people have done some brilliant studies and they've discovered that naming feelings has a big impact on your brain. So what they did in this study was they put people into a scanner and they were scanning the activity that was going on in their brain, and then they showed them faces which showed fear or anger. And when they did that, this bit of their brain lit up, their amygdala in their middle brain. And so looking at these pictures of fear and anguish on other people's faces lit up that emotion part of our brain. In my analogy, that's the sock bit over the top of the golf club. And then they asked people, they put people in a scanner, they scanned what was going on in their brain, they showed the same faces, and they asked them to name the feeling that people were feeling. And this is what they found, that instead of that middle bit of the brain being activated, instead of the sock bit, the bike helmet bit was activated, the human brain, the front bit, as you can see there. And what we know is that labeling the emotion, it reduces the activity in the midbrain and increases the activity in the front of the brain, the thinking brain. So literally just by saying, gosh, I'm feeling really anxious right now, we can start to switch on our human brain. And if we can do that, then we have the ability to think about, and this is what I'm going to do about it. If we're just stuck in the anxiety, it's very difficult to think, what could I do? Or how can I help myself? Or what do I need right now? But if we say, gosh, I'm feeling really anxious, this feeling I've got is anxiety, then we can use the brain we already have, which is brilliant, to think about what we do next. And I really like this model. This comes from grief work. And I got this or an image like this from childbereavement.org, and I think it's a really nice way to think about this. At the moment, we're faced with this problem that feels like it is all consuming. It's all people will talk about, it's all we can think about, it's all our work lives that are impacting, for children's schools are closing, everything is around the coronavirus and the problem. And I think that's quite often a place where people are faced with a problem. And one of the things that we have to do is find a way, without thinking that we can necessarily shrink the problem, of growing life around it. And what that might look like in the current situation is, if you're on self-isolation or you're having to work or study in a different way, finding ways to make that work might be that next circle on my picture. So just finding a way to think, what have I still got in my life that is around the problem, that is not the problem? And over time, we know this is what happens when somebody loses someone they love. To start with, that death is absolutely all-consuming. And over time, it doesn't change how sad they feel and how much they miss that person and where their grief is. But over time, life grows around that grief, and there is a way of living which is found. And I think that's the way that we will be finding in the next few weeks and probably the next few months, is a way of living around this difficulty. And we will find that, I have no doubt already. If you look at just the example of what's happening with schools are closing today. We don't know when they'll open again. It may be sometime towards the end of the summer. It may be not until the new academic year. We really don't know what will happen with that. And that is a huge problem for people who are at home with their children. It's a problem for children. And we will find ways to entertain these children shut in our houses, to give them an education, to find ways to talk about what's going on, and we will start to grow around it. And I think it's the same with self-isolation. It's the same if our movement is restricted more. People in other countries that have been locked down, I've heard some beautiful stories about people singing to each other on balconies, about a man going up to his roof and running an exercise class for all the apartment blocks around it. We will find ways to make a life around the problem that we're faced with. And eventually we will find that there's quite a lot of life around it, which might be different to how it was before, but is a way of living. Another way that I think is really, really powerful is finding some way to process in your head what is happening. What I've started doing, because I feel like every day something happens and things simultaneously are moving so fast, and yet time seems to have slowed down a little bit, and it seems to be forever since it was Monday. And you know, since Monday things have changed dramatically already. And I've been writing on my computer every day a little kind of journal entry. This is what happened today. This is where my thinking was. I've been writing funny things that happened, and also scary things. And just it's my way of brain dumping. I've set an alarm on my phone to remind me to do it at 8 o'clock in the evening. And after that, I try to do anti-coronavirus things. So I read a book, watch the telly. I try not to go on my phone too much because my WhatsApp is crazy at the moment with lots of different updates. And I'm finding that the brain dumpness is really helpful. I also think when we're through this, I will want to remember some of the things that have happened, what it was like to live through this. I will want to touch base with when I decided certain things, because things are moving so fast, I don't know if I'll be able to keep track of that. And there's a really good evidence base that writing about things is a really helpful way when we're going through something very difficult. And in fact, in my work, I do quite a lot of trauma therapy for people who, after they've been through something very traumatic or have post-traumatic stress disorder. And all of those therapies involve kind of processing what has happened to you, and this is a way of processing while it's going on. And it may be just that you write a list of bullet points, did this today, now at home, but any way you have of kind of keeping a record of what's happening. Could be a photo diary on Instagram or on Snapchat. You could make some YouTube videos, you could blog about it, or you could just write in an old school book or type it on a typewriter. You know, do it in a way that works for you. We know all these things make a massive difference to mental health, and that hasn't changed just because we're in this very odd time at the moment. So these are really key things that you can do, and anybody can do this, whatever their situation. You keep a routine, even if it's different from the routine you would have had before. You get up at a certain time, you do some things, you eat meals at regular times. Those things are going to make a real difference to your mental health. Don't underestimate the power of small things like that. Think about sleep. If you are at home, or you're not going to your normal activities, it might be really easy to not sleep in the way, to sleep longer in the mornings, maybe to stay up later. It might be that you're spending more time looking at screens and therefore you're not sleeping so well. It might be like me, that you're waking up in the night a little bit. So try and maintain a regular pattern of sleep if you can, even if you're not getting up for the things you normally would be getting up for. And don't worry if your sleep does get a bit off. That's likely to happen for some of us. But what we know is the best thing to set your body clock is the time you get up in the morning. So if you have had a late night, try and still get up at a decent time, and you'll then find that you can get your pattern back in sync over time. I think we need to be very careful about how much social media and general media involvement we're having. Do what feels right. We do know that keeping informed is really important. So you do need to keep in touch with what's happening, but maybe you decide how you're going to do that. You're going to read some news articles in the morning, watch the news conference in the afternoon, but don't then you could spend all day reading articles about this, and that won't help because you'll be reading the same things over and over. And be careful about getting sucked into the hype that's happening. Everybody is talking about this. Sometimes there's quite alarmist things going up, particularly on social media. Just use what feels helpful to you. I've stopped looking at Facebook at the moment because there's lots of opinions on there and lots of things that I'm not finding helpful for me. I'm doing what I need to do and not what I don't. Make an effort to stay in touch with people, but don't do so much that you feel overwhelmed by the effort. And finally, do kind things for other. There's massive evidence base that doing kind things for other people has a huge effect on their well-being. And it doesn't matter whether you're at home and you're doing that, or whether you're going out and leafleting, or all the other things, lovely things that people are doing. But you can be offering support and encouragement, and you can be part of the team that gets through this. And you might be one of those people who is having a slower pace of life and therefore has something really positive to contribute to the people who are working. So do think about ways that you can help others, whatever they are, even if that is remotely. I want to talk a little bit about what we can do to help children, and don't switch off if you don't know any children or don't have any contact with them, because I actually think this is basically a more basic guide to everything that I've just said. So number one is they've got worries and they need something to do with it. Don't think that children don't know about this, aren't worried about this. I'm pretty sure there isn't a child in the country who is not aware of what's going on at the moment. So we need to notice the worry and name it, and wonder with them, I wonder if you're feeling a bit worried right now, or I wonder what you're thinking about this, because that's going to really help them to say, actually, yeah, this is what I'm feeling, or no, it's something like this. So talking about it is really important. And as I've already shown you from those pictures of brain scans, when we notice it and we name it, then we can start to think about it. And with children, we do some really fun stuff when we're thinking about worry. We might have a worry time, or we might draw the worry, or in this case, you might draw the virus, and we might draw all the things we're frightened about happening. And we might spend up to about half an hour, definitely no longer than that, washing around in the worry. Let's not just pretend everything's fine. You know, as we all know, life is very different at the moment. So do think about it. Don't just dismiss it. I think if you're a parent or a grandparent or anybody working with children, it's really important that you remember your job is not to make everything okay. Your job is to help them deal with it when things aren't, and the skills that they will learn from that will be useful for the rest of their life are absolutely invaluable. So do think about it. Don't think about it for too long. Don't spend the entire day talking about it, worrying about it, drawing about it, but do put time aside that you can do that in. And then make a plan or change the focus of attention. And this comes from this very helpful it'll come up in a minute, worry tree that I'm going to talk about. But if you need a quick reference guide to this, it's stop, think, do. Stop, what's going on for me right now, think about it, and then do something that's helpful. I don't know why the picture hasn't come up, but I'll maybe add that onto the end. So I want to talk about this model a little bit, and it's talked about a lot to do with children, but I think it's very helpful for all of us to think about this at the moment. What children need is somebody to support them when they're doing all their exciting things and comfort them when things are difficult. And we all need that a little bit now, don't we? I'm really glad that I've got people around me who are supporting me while I'm going off and doing the work that I need to do. And so think about how you can do this for other people in your life. It might be friends, might be family members. You don't have to physically be present to be holding them in mind, thinking about them, checking in with them, and helping them to organise the way that they're feeling. And this model is a really amazing model. Their website is there. Do look on it if you're interested, because they have lots of great resources there. And they say this: They say always be bigger, wiser, stronger and kind. And when possible, follow the child's needs. So if your child is needing to talk about worry and anxiety, talk about it with them. If they don't look like they want to talk about it or they're not that bothered, follow their lead, but offer them the opportunities. When you need to, take charge. This is how we're going to do things now, or I can see that's really bothering you, so we're going to do this. And I think those aren't just rules for working with children, they might be rules for working with lots of people, particularly if you're working in any kind of key worker service. I think these are rules that you might be using, and then you might need to find people who are there as a safe pair of hands for you. Here's the worry tree, so it did come up. So this is a really helpful resource. Again, getselfhelp.co.uk has loads of really helpful things around anxiety and lots of other mental health difficulties, so do look there. But I want to talk about this tree. It's a way of working out, can I do something about this? If I can, I'll do it. If I can't, how can I help myself? So I think you might look at what am I specifically worrying about? Yes, I'm worried about coronavirus, but what is the thing I'm most worried about? That I'm not going to be able to eat, that my business is going under, that I'm going to die from it. What are the things that you're worried about? And really kind of unpick it for yourself. Then you need to decide, is it a current problem or a hypothetical situation? Or a better question in the coronavirus situation is, can I do something about it? There will be some worries that you have that are not hypothetical, but that you can't do anything about. There are lots of things, like I said earlier, you can do. You can wash your hands, you can social distance, you can isolate when you need to. But are you doing something very productive? But there are some situations that you won't be able to do anything about. In which case, you need to change the focus of your attention. If you can do something about, plan to do something and then do it. And you can see it there. If you need to do it now, do it straight away. If you need to do it later, then schedule it. But let's talk about what changing the focus of attention means, because it's all very well to say that, and it's very difficult to do. If you're really worried about something and it's something you can't do anything about, then changing the focus of attention is the last thing your brain wants to do, because remember, it's adaptive for your brain to focus on anxiety. So what I mean by that is actively directing your brain to think about something else. Remember that hypervigilance slide I put up with Homer Simpson, and how our brain is kind of engrossed in the thing that we think is most important. Now, sometimes that's adaptive and helpful. If you're at home and you're just worrying endlessly about this, then that isn't that helpful. So then you need to be quite kind of firm with your brain, which is what I said in this slide, where necessary, take charge. You need to be firm with your brain and think about something else. So it might be an engrossing task like planning what you're going to do that day, something that is going to use up your processing capacity and make you think. It might be a mindfulness activity, and I'm going to do one of those in a minute with you. It might be remembering a great holiday that you had. It might be writing your bucket list for all the things you're going to do once we get out the other side of this. But do something engrossing. It might just be that for you, I don't know, sewing or crafting or getting on with work. Anything might be engrossing. It needs to be something that allows your brain to switch from the going round and round and round with the worry. But importantly, it's not easy, and you do need to practice it. I think quite often when people try this, they say, well, I tried that and it didn't work. And I think it's really important that you remember, this is a skill. It's not something we can automatically do. If I went out tomorrow and tried to, I don't know, play basketball. I haven't played basketball since I was at school. If I tried to do that, I wouldn't be very good at it. I'd have to learn the skills around playing basketball, how you dribble, how you shoot, what you do with your feet, what you do with your hands, how you think about the other team members. This is exactly the same. It's not like it's something you can just do, because thinking is something we do all the time, so we assume that we can do anything to do with our brain. This is a skill and you have to practice it. And if you think it's not working, that may be just because you haven't practiced it enough. You're essentially teaching your brain to do something new, and that takes time. So stick with it. Don't give up first time. So we're going to do a little exercise. I put this in because I think it's really easy to talk about all this stuff. And watching this presentation might just become another one of those things I'm doing because I'm worried about coronavirus. And so I wanted to do this. And I would ask you to see if you can do this for yourself while you're listening, and see if it makes a difference. So give me 1 second, I'm just going to get it up. Okay, so this is what I'd like you to do. I'm going to go through a relaxation script. It's called Safe Place. I want you to just take part in a way that feels comfortable for you. So you could just listen, you could sit, close your eyes, you can lie down if you want to, you do any of those things. Or you could just kind of listen and pay attention and take notes or whatever, because it's not always the right time for people to do relaxation. Okay, so with that in mind, let's begin. I want you to start by getting comfortable. And just for a couple of minutes, I'd like you to focus on your breathing. If you feel able to, close your eyes. And just become aware of any tension in your body. And let that tension go with each out breath. Focus on the breath in and the tension going out. And now I want you to imagine in your mind's eye that you're going to a safe place. This place is unique to you. It's somewhere that you feel the most comfortable and safe, and somewhere where you can just be yourself. Somewhere that you can take time out from the world. Now, this might be a place that you've been to before, or it might be a place that you've just imagined, or seen pictures of, or are aware of. It might be a place that's inside, or a place that's out of doors. And I want you to see if you can visualize your safe place. First, what's directly around you? What can you see? What things are there in your safe place? And look carefully. What kind of textures are there? What kind of colours? And then in your mind's eye, kind of spread your gaze. What can you see slightly further away? What's available in your safe space for you? Think about not just what you can see, but also what you can hear. Perhaps what you can smell. And while you're doing this, you may find that your attention drifts, that you start thinking about something else. That's completely normal. When you notice that that's happened, just attend to it and then bring your attention back to looking around your safe place. And now, still being in your safe place, what I'd like you to do is bring your focus internally. How does it feel to be where you are? What do you like about this place? Why is it that it feels safe for you? And take one more opportunity to look around, see what you can see. Before you bring your attention back to your breath. Breathing in calm, breathing out tension. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. So thank you if you did that. There are lots and lots and lots of those kind of things online. There are also some brilliant apps that you can get that will talk you through these kinds of activities. A couple that I really like are Headspace, which at the moment has some free things you can listen to help anxiety, and actually has some free content anyway. And there's another one called Stop, Breathe, Think, which again has a lot of free content and has added some extra content at the moment. So have a look at what apps are out there that you can get on your phone or your computer, or you can just find some scripts and read them for yourself. So other things that you can do that are helpful. These are all things that we know from the evidence make a difference. Just thinking about what you're grateful for is really important. So I've put up there the list of things that I was grateful for yesterday. I'm trying to write what I'm grateful for every day. And these are difficult times. The things that I'm grateful for might not have been the things I was grateful for when we weren't in this situation that we're in. But I'm incredibly grateful that we have a functioning NHS. I'm incredibly grateful for the amazing teachers who've been caring for the children under situations of quite extreme pressure, and they're quite stressed themselves, and still they've been doing that. That shows the strength of human character, I think. I love that there are all these random acts of altruism springing up. I was hearing about people leafleting. I've seen banners that people have hung out windows, people who are shopping for each other, people who are helping people and they never would before. And I think long may that continue, because somebody said to me last week, no good will come of this situation, and I disagree. I think a lot of good will come out of this, as well as all the challenges that we're facing. And I think what it will be is that people will be able to look back and be proud about the way that they behaved towards others in this situation. I also think I'm grateful that pollution is going down. It's a shame that we're all self-isolating, but the environment is going to get a big win from this. I also think chocolate is absolutely vital for my functioning, and I'm really glad that I had some yesterday. I also would like to talk about just expressing emotion. I've explained to you about why we get anxious and that it's happening there. It's really important that that doesn't make everything okay. Sometimes you're going to feel overwhelmed, you're going to cry, or you're going to shout, or you're going to feel really rubbish. That's okay. What I would urge you to do is let it out rather than bottle it up in a way that feels helpful, which might be, like I said, crying or shouting or whatever, but it might be going for a run or a walk, or taking some deep breaths, or doing an exercise. And I also think don't be afraid to laugh. I actually have seen more people laughing in the hospital that I work in this week than I think I've seen in a long time. And I think some of that is quite dark humour sometimes, and some of it is unrelated to COVID-19. And I think we need that. We need light relief and laughing when we can, because there are some things that are difficult, and therefore we need to find joys and pleasure in people where we can do that. And then sometimes you don't have time to do a big exercise like I just showed you, or to go and source something. There are some really small things you can do. If you're feeling overwhelmed, this might happen, say, when you go to the supermarket, when you go to work, when you hear a new piece of news, you might need to just ground yourself. And I mean by that, like really solidly, this is where I am right now. I am standing on the floor. I can feel my socks or my shoes. I can feel the fabric of my clothes. I can see things ahead of me. Just really kind of get anchored in the present moment if you feel like you're panicking. And there's a blog there that I've put up that's about breathing, and there's lots of ideas about that on the internet if you wanted it. Somebody drew this lovely image, so I thought I would share it. If you are into looking things up on the internet, this I think is what you should look up. Loads of people are putting up ideas about the ways that we might look after ourselves and the way that we might support other people. And so if you're interested, those things are there. And I'm going to finish this webinar with this. I think we know from the evidence helping others has a positive impact on our mental health. I also think at this time when we're feeling, lots of things are feeling out of control, to find something that we can manage and control makes a real difference. So if you feel helpless, help others. Find a way to do that. That might be within your family. It might just be with one person. It might be something that you can do that makes a difference. But the more that we do this, and remember, you're helping others if you do the things that we've been told to do, like social distancing, like self-isolation if you need to, like washing your hands. So think about how we behave in a socially conscious way at this time that makes a difference to other people and how we respond to this. Here are some references that might help you if you want to start looking for places to look after your mental health. There is loads of information out there. This week it's been a kind of explosion in the amount of information about looking after your mental health. So use it if you need it, because I think you can find things that are tailored to the specific things you're most concerned about. So that's the end of my webinar. Thank you very much for listening.